No one knows everything, but everyone knows something no one else knows, including you. Welcome to the other side of things. I'm your host, Dr. Michael DiMaria, and for 35 years, I've been a guide of the soul. On the other side of things, we explore alternative perspectives on challenging topics, ranging from love, sex, death, and madness to dream work, breath work, and other cutting edge healing modalities. We live on a precipice as a species. So let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Things. I'm really thrilled and heartwarmed to welcome our guest today. And she's been a friend for over 13 years, and I've known about her work for much longer than that. We've had similarities in terms of our training and our love of nature and yoga and the work of the lineage of Bill Plotkin, who has influenced both of us very, very deeply. And so I'm going to read her bio and then bring Rebecca Wildbear onto the air with us today and to talk about her newest book, Wild Yoga. If that doesn't spark your interest, I don't know what will. So, Rebecca, thank you for being on. So excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm really excited for our conversation. Thanks for having me.
It's a joy. Rebecca Wildbear is a soul guide, psychotherapist, and author of Wild Yoga, a practice of initiation, veneration, and advocacy of and for the earth. She helps people remember who they truly are and listen for the dream of their life, the mythic calling their soul is here to embody. Through nature based healing, deep imagination, and ceremony, with over 25 years of experience in body centered therapy and wilderness guiding, she invites others into deeper intimacy with the earth and their own wild soul. She's a guide at the Animas Valley Institute, where she has led soul initiation journeys for over 2 decades. Rebecca is also the founder of the Wild Yoga Way, a soul rooted path of embodied listening, imagination, and earth communion. She integrates this way of being into all her offerings, including private sessions, wilderness quests, programs, and retreats, and an upcoming online year-long immersion currently in development. You can learn more about her work at RebeccaWildbear.com, and all of these will be in the show notes as well. So, Rebecca, a thousand thank yous. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I love the work that you do too, and appreciate the connections and overflow here that will lead into the depth of our conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's so special. We've been uh, talking and connecting off and on. I know one of the pet projects we've always talked about is doing a river trip, perhaps together, guiding a river trip. We both have a love of nature and yoga, and of course, the soul work that's so critical for the planet today. And I also want to thank you just for. I often, particularly if it's a guest that I've had past history with, just to share a bit, that not only is a guide with animus and on your own, but you really helped me when I was working with some very troubled young adults, back, I think that was the first time at, wilderness program in Colorado. And it was just life changing for these two young men. And I was able to come out and spend time on the land, out there with you and watching you interact with these young men and these in this wilderness therapy program. And it was really moving to watch how you worked and how you really connected with them. And and even though there's so much, and we'll get into this in wild yoga, and I mentioned even before we got on, I consider you not only a soul sister and a kindred spirit of what I call a person of the twilight, someone who literally can walk between the worlds. But this was also a program that really needed and required these young adults to be initiated as functioning adults in our society, and your capacity to be able to be there and help them in that way. I just was really, I admired your capacity to do that, that you could speak more than one language, and, not just the mythopoetic, but also, like, okay, you guys, you got to learn to make a fire. You need to learn how, you know, the primitive skills of surviving and communicating with others. So my hat's off to you with that. And I just really wanted to bring that up before we jump into everything else.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love working with people of all ranges and stages wherever they start. And yeah, so the background in wilderness therapy with young people who've sometimes started out in a rough situation with challenges, all the way to somebody, deep into their soul journey who's been, you know, who's on the depth of past and still
Right.
listening for ever deeper places. I love to be able to have the capacity to see and meet people where they're at and support them along the way. And I've always been waiting for that moment. I might get tired of working in the field because I have been a wilderness guide virtually my whole life,
Yeah.
starting with Outward Bound. And I'm not tired of it. I relish my time in the field and just feel grateful every time I get to be working with people there.
No, it's wonderful. And having, you know, I did wilderness guiding for about 10 years and it's a lot, you know, it takes a lot out of you. And so again, I'm just, you know, my hat's off to you with that as well. And, you know, and I know we talked about getting to this, but I thought it might be an interesting place to begin and then weave back into how you came to write wild yoga and marrying those two. But since we're on the topic, you know, we both and for most of the listeners out there are people who know and understand, you know, the toxic nature of our current culture and the difficulties that we have in terms of these crises in nature and culture right now that we're facing that are just huge. And so we have this whole generation or a couple generations, you know, millennials, Gen Zs, who didn't buy into this cultural narrative and sees not only the toxic nature of it, but kind of the end game, and didn't buy into becoming kind of a quote productive member of the society, and then decide to do a soul journey when they realized, you know, hey, is this all there is? But they had kind of an egoic foundation. So that we have a lot of people in the margins now who are deeply and highly sensitive, who are, you know, wanting and yearning and longing for more, but haven't, as Bill would say, developed a healthy ego, right?
Mhm.
And I'm just curious, if you have thoughts about, and I even found your book to be more accessible than some of Bill's books in terms of just that you know, reaching people almost right where they are, for almost anybody to begin with an asana or talking to a tree. And that, you know, and yes, you know, given the soul centric wheel of development and everything else, and Bill's work is so profound and so important and so critical to to have visionary change agents in the world. And we have more and more people lost in the margins that are needing an introduction to soul work, an introduction to try to find their way in this crazy culture, which is part of what I felt was happening during that wilderness therapy you were doing. But anything you can say kind of towards maybe some of those people that might be listening, or young people or people with kids that haven't launched and are looking for a way in to help them find a soul path, even though they're also working on that, also beginning development of having a healthy ego in this toxic society? It's a big question,
Mhm.
I know.
Yeah, it's a big question, and but I love it, and it does speak to the heart of a lot of what I like to do, which is make soul accessible to people,
Mhm.
like through the language I use and the practices I use, that anyone wherever you are can begin on the path, and anyone wherever you are can start engaging in the practices. And one of the things I just hold central about soul is that ultimately it's a mystery.
Mm.
And that means that all the maps and models we make, which can be totally helpful. And that's why I'm so grateful for Bill's work, because it is great to create a language and a path and to see what's possible and in the ways of the journey. And at the same time, I also like to focus on practices in my book with an idea that we might not ultimately know how the journey's going to go, because I've been surprised a lot. Just as an example, I might have had somebody on a journey who seemed like in the perfect place to have a soul encounter, just all the work they've done together, whole. And then they go out, and what happens for them is they meet a lot of their protective parts
Mm,
because, that was just the piece that they hadn't done. But
right.
I would have thought, well, surely they looked ready, for it all. And then on the other hand, I've sometimes met somebody who had a ton of wounding, and like I would have summed up, oh wow, like they're going to just have to heal that. Like there's just so
Right.
much going on. It's not going to be space for soul. And then I was wrong. Like
Yeah.
they were doing healing and holding, but soul came through at the same time. They had an encounter, their imaginary, visionary experience. And I'm just like, wow, blown away. So it shows me that, I don't know what's going to happen for people. And the best way I can set them up is offer them practices
Mm,
to meet them where they're at so that they can go deeper. And I think that is one of the most joyful things about being a soul guide for me is being at the cauldron of mystery,
mm.
of not knowing exactly what's going to happen and bubble up and continually learning more by what happens in each person's journey.
Oh, I love that. The cauldron of mystery. And again, that's so beautiful and reminds me there is this quantum dimension is the only thing I can think of, which is, how in the quantum dimension, so many unpredictable things can happen, and talk about mystery and uncertainty and opening to those capacities. Because as you were talking, I was getting these, in reading your book, we have not only love for Bill's work and David White's, but two people influenced us, Martin Prechtel and Malidoma, Patrice Sommet. And Malidoma would call them truth bumps or a breeze from the other world. Like, like as you were speaking, like I was just getting those truth bumps, it's like the waking up of the soul, that animating principle of the body. Um, and that's, it's a great way to kind of move into what brought you to write Wild Yoga? How long were you a yoga teacher in terms of, well, how did that integration happen, and how has it been to then also write it, and how it's been received? Just tell us a little bit about the journey of coming to this phrase wild yoga, writing about it, and now living and embracing this aspect of your soul work.
Yeah, that's such a big question because I think it's, really the journey of my whole life because that book has a lot of memoir in it, and it is me trying to put out my version of like, here's the practices that I think are most important in these times for our world,
Yes.
or at least the piece that I can contribute to
Yes.
that conversation, which is a lot about listening to these other voices, these other aspects of reality that often get sidelined, that are like central to me. Um, but where did it start? Like I've always been like a kind of a philosopher, even as a kid, like asking lots of questions about the reality of life, and became a philosophy religious studies major
Mm,
in college. So was always kind of at the confluence of these kinds of like bigger questions of life, existential questions. And my senior year of college, I got cancer, and I'd been raised Catholic, and I didn't know for sure if I believed in God or a higher power. I was constantly journaling and praying. I wanted to believe. I was actually constantly talking to religious people. I wanted them to convert me, but they couldn't
mm,
because no language, no words could do it. I'm very experiential by nature, so it had to be experiential. And my cancer was actually an experience of coming into an understanding. I think it was both a soul encounter as well as a first understanding of the reality of the spiritual world. So both inward and outward. And it wasn't visual, it was kinesthetic. It was like there was something that shifted in me because there was a real strong possibility. The odds were that I would die. And I had to slow down. I was quite busy in college, like I was an overachiever, and I couldn't do that other stuff, and I had to really slow way down. And in that process I started to experience a sense inside myself, viscerally, physically, of something in me, that was something mysterious that I didn't know.
mm,
And I also began to feel, I'd always felt sort of higher power in nature, but I began to feel it wasn't just in nature. that there was actually a presence in the world, a larger spiritual presence that was everywhere. And so it shifted my reality, even though I still didn't know very much about it, because I realized it was the most important thing to me, to learn more about that and to stay connected to it. But, once I did get well, I was bombarded with all the things young people are about, like, what's your job going to be? And like, how are you going to make a living? And you're an adult now. And so I just doing that on the side a bit. So it took me a while of exploration. I explored many different churches and religions and never really quite found my way. And actually, it was things like Animas Valley Institute Soulcraft Intensive that I did when I was 29, and the yoga that I started with Donna Namba Stapleton when I was 31. Those things became foundational to me. And of course, other things like meditation and Hakomi and somatic archaeology with Ruby Gibson. And, I've had many teachers, but I would probably say that, Donna Namba's yoga and Bill Plotkin's Soulcraft were very central to my path. And partly because it involved a lot of invitation to be creative and to have your own experience and to find things out on your own rather than like a dogma that this is what you should
Yes.
believe.
Yes.
Which is what I really encourage for other people too. I mean, obviously, I can be opinionated and have my beliefs. I wrote a whole book, but the practices are all out. Go out and try,
Yeah.
and come back and tell me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. No, that's wonderful. First person experience of the world, bringing ourselves back to the first person experience of the world. I was a philosophy, religious studies major also, and undergrad, and got it very much into phenomenology, which is, the first person experience of the world, coming back to our experience. When you share about your cancer journey in the book, it's very moving. And growing up Catholic, also, I loved, I just so resonated with, you wanted to be, an acolyte. Why can't I be an altar girl instead of an altar boy? And the misogyny and all of that. Here I was an altar boy, even felt at one time like a call to the priesthood, but I'd get in trouble, with asking the nuns, well, if Mary is the mother of God, does that make her more powerful and a goddess? And it's like I was always getting into trouble, same kind of questions. And so I love that your capacity also with the cancer, that slowed you down, brought you into your body, and really gave you a chance to begin. And that's a really beautiful thing, that this presence, this nature, that awareness is everywhere, which I think, in the sense of this animistic understanding, which you also touch on and share. I love, like, even, Joseph Campbell, when he was Bill Moyer's interview, and they were talking about nature and all that, and he said, well, this microphone is also part of it. It's allowing us to have this conversation, allowing this to go out into the world. And although all the challenges with technology, for me, it's when our 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 technology gets us diverted from that alignment with primary. I'd like to think of there's primary nature and then secondary nature as technology
Mm,
mediated by human nature. And if that secondary nature is not in alignment with primary nature, that's how we get into trouble. But that's another discussion. But it made me
mm,
think of that. Um, so, and I also loved when you mentioned, um, this connection to, um, the soul work and being a midwife to the soul initiation. Even when you were saying, gosh, somebody who's ready for a soul initiation, deeper soul encounter, and how you see that unfolding. You also mentioned in your book, and it was very moving to me, because I had this very similar experience. And I want to thank you for the memoir aspects of your book, because for those out there interested in a read, it is both practical, but it's also so soulful and moving, because to me, I've always learned more from first person experience, when somebody's going to share their vulnerabilities, when they share their places of brokenness and their places of struggle. One thing that I loved about it is, similar to the dream work that we both practice in Bill's spirit, which is speaking the dream in the present tense. I loved that your book, you go into these experiences of your past in the present tense, almost like if you were relating them in a dream, and it really added to the narrative. And I don't know how intentional that was. I'm assuming it really was, but like even when your first loves, or when you're dealing with certain things, you're speaking it as if it's happening in that moment. And I was just curious how intentional that was.
Yeah, that was intentional because I played with it a couple different ways before I decided. There was the logic that dictates, well, it should happen in the past. But it really felt more alive to share it in the
Yes,
present. And it is interesting how psychically, to me, some of our most powerful moments, it's as if they are still happening in us in the present
absolutely.
tense.
Absolutely. I found myself captivated by doing that. And I felt my consciousness shifting. And I had a question. It's like, is she gone to first person again? I mean, or present tense again? And did you get pushback from your editor or New World or your publisher at all for doing that? Or did they encourage? I felt it as an author myself. I just loved it.
I can't remember if I got any pushback. I know we had various conversations about things, and I think there was some challenges the way I was moving back and forth because I was in past tense sometimes.
Right.
And so, I had to kind of be clear in which stories I was telling in the present tense. And I was also telling dreams in the present tense, which is
Yes.
also, there was some pushback there too. Well, this dream already happened. And it's
Right.
like, yeah, but if I'm teaching people to talk about dreams in the present tense, then let me write about them in
Yeah.
the present tense.
Yeah.
And certain dreams also are still alive, especially mythic dreams. Even if they're a
Absolutely.
dream that already happened, they're still a dream that's very much presently alive. So yeah, I think there was some navigation about just how to maneuver tense wise, given the nuances that I was wanting to write. But New World was a great publisher to work
Yeah.
with, and I really enjoyed that they would give input, and then they would also really take my ideas and really want me to present things how I wanted to. So that was lovely.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I know they publish most of Bill's books, if not all of them. And it so they understood where you're coming from. And that's also I want to say is that not only the present tense, but it's so inspiring to me, because having been doing this work myself 30, 40 years, and finding like that your narrative, your capacity, and have been published by a major publisher, and doing this, that not only that present tense, but that you're so vulnerable and open and animated about your love of trees, your love of these beings and connections to the other worlds, and these presences and in nature that you've engaged in, and very like boldly sharing that in a way that to me is critical for us to do now in our world. And I just remember how hard it's been over the years for me to step out in writing to speak these things, like this new book that I have not published yet, that I the Way of Twilight, I'm talking for the first time about some of the deeper visionary experiences I've had, and I felt inspired and encouraged by your courage doing that. And I was curious if that was a struggle at all, or you've been on this path a long time. But I also know there's a difference speaking in a small group out in the wilderness about these
Very big.
things to people who are initiated to some degree in this work or more, versus out there in the world at large.
Yeah, there's a very big difference, and I really, you could say one of the ways I wrote my book is I kind of fooled myself,
Mm,
because I actually love to write, even stuff that's not published. I write plenty
nice.
of stuff that I haven't
Yeah.
published, and writing is therapeutic for me. Like there's a story I want to tell, there's a truth I want to tell, I write it. I decide later whether it's something I share publicly. And when I was writing the book, I was in a state where I was allowing myself, well, what if you could just share whatever you felt was the most important,
Mm,
and you weren't worried about the, you know, the airy fairy judgments or
right.
other things that come your way when you say these stories? Just do it how you want for now, and we can edit later. Like let's not think about publication.
Nice.
And uh, and so that's how I did it. And I did edit and take some things out, but not much. I ultimately went with how I first wrote it, and it was it felt like the right move to make. But energetically, there was something that really did feel vulnerable
Mm,
after my book was out about, wow, now you've done it. Like my muse totally, I felt the call, like
mm,
this is the thing to do. But it felt edgy, like
yeah.
afterwards it was like almost like reorienting myself in reality a little bit. Like, people know these stories about you, or you've shared these,
Yeah.
and this is, it's a lot. This is a lot. This is different. This is a different reality to get used to.
Yeah.
And I don't regret it, but it's a, which is why I can totally understand if somebody wouldn't want to share
Mhm.
stories and keep them private. Or a lot of the stories that I shared were things that happened years ago, so time I had a lot of time to be with them before I put them out. And there are still stories that I long to tell that I don't put out yet. But some of them I bookmark, like maybe later. This just isn't the moment. We'll
Mm,
see. Um, so yeah, thank you. I've had a lot of writing coaches that really encourage me to tell my story. There's a part of me that can get very informational. Like, I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I just want to tell the facts. And I've had so many writing coaches that are like, no, no, tell us about you. And
yeah.
it's really pulled me out to, like, yeah. And I realized too, one of the most powerful books one of my teachers, Joanna Macy, wrote was her autobiography, Widening Circles.
Yeah. So I love that book. Oh,
I was glued to it.
yeah. Same.
So I understand, like, there's something powerful about telling your own story. So
Yeah.
so I did.
Yeah. And she talks about things in there, but that, was so courageous to tell. And of course, I guess I can't remember how old she was when she wrote it. And, one of my teachers, Robert Johnson, same thing but I found, and then again, just, I'm such a fan of yours and the book that for those out there, I just, it's so brought it alive, and like one thing I really related to, which hadn't heard you speak before, because this is part of, we have these projections on others, and here, or you're one of the most seasoned animist guides that I know of, and heard of you and for years before we even met and connected, and just such respect for you and your work. And so this image of, oh, you must have, of course you have that connection with your parents and your family, and when you shared, while you were at Open Sky, the wilderness therapy, taking these families on these wilderness quests, which we've talked about, which I would love to do myself with my family at some point, that you said, gosh, I long to have that experience with my parents, and then you ask them those really, difficult questions, like what's some of your deepest pains, and then that response, and how that hit you. And I was glued to the page. Like that was parts
Mm.
that just so spoke to me, because something, my parents had very similar, dreams of what I was to do, and had those messages. And one of the moves for me when I moved from doing as much wilderness guiding to trying to pursue my music and film and writing was part of that feeling a call or longing of my soul work calling me in some other directions. And there were life situations and circumstances that also, it's like the river was shifting, and was I going to shift with it, and could I let what did I need to let go of to let those new things arise. And I was very touched by, that sharing about your parents, and also your own sharing of, oh, I've sat here listening and helping other people discover their soul path and heal their wounds. And how much have I done for myself? That those questions that always come up, and what's the next iteration? What's the next vehicle, delivery system for my soul work? And I was just really moved by that, and grateful you shared with that. Really helped me connect and see and answer some of the questions you ask the reader more deeply.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about
Well,
that, or
I'll
we can
just
move. Yeah.
well, I think I'll just add, and I'm just appreciating the whole conversation and all
Yeah.
you're sharing about how the book landed in you and touched you. And it goes back to your original question about writing wild yoga and maybe
Yes.
even the theme wild yoga.
Yes.
And I almost didn't call it wild yoga because you can guess that when you put yoga in the main title and there's only two words, people assume it's going to be an asana book
Right.
because in our culture, yoga means asana.
Right.
And I intentionally didn't want to do that because I wanted to take us back to the larger definition of yoga about
Yes.
union, which is about including it all, like all the
Yes.
things are here, like
Yes.
us, the world, our relationship with the world. And yoga is a lot about relationship,
Hmm.
which is what I've discovered that for me, this is the new, like, I don't know, passion and query, but soul is relationship. It's our relationship to ourselves, to our depths, to all these worlds, to each other. And it's just a lot at the core. So anyway, what you're sharing just really resonates with all of that being up, and I'm just appreciating the deep inquiry of your stories because
Mm.
it's pulling out the deeper meaning of the book.
I love that, and that's what as a I my deepest yoga I've been taught was from Swami Jay, who is a worked with Swami Rama, and his deep teaching for me is he was my yoga nidra teacher, and he doesn't even practice asana. It is about union with the all, with call it the Tao, with yeah, with the all. I remember, what is it, the Dojin, who says, enlightenment is the intimacy with all things, which is both intriguing and terrifying, right? Like, how do we become intimate with
Mhm.
all things? And you bring the reader into that, in so many different ways. And I particularly love the looking at the challenging dreams, and there's two themes that I would like, that just really caught me, that I think would be really powerful for the listeners. And I just found myself, touched by and got the truth bumps, the breeze from the other world. Um, the pearl of our vulnerabilities. I just love that phrase. And I wonder if you could just speak into what the pearl of vulnerabilities means to you.
Well, I love that you asked that, and I'm touched that that chapter calls you, and in general the vulnerability sharing, because it is something to me too that seems like at the core of this whole thread of relationship, and the thing that separate can be separating, the feeling that can arise that can be separating is that, oh, the pain I'm suffering, it's just me, I'm all alone, or the shame I feel, or the less than, or whatever it is, the whatever vulnerability, the grief, it's just I'm an island by myself. And I think there's something in vulnerability. There's gifts in different flavors of vulnerability. There's all different flavors. They're not. It's like a whole ice cream store now,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
of flavors. But vulnerability overall, I think, as a commonality, brings connection
Yes.
and relationship, and an idea that we're not alone in our vulnerability, that we're actually, that's one way that we're the same.
Mhm.
Our vulnerabilities may be very similar or they may be different, but we all suffer. That's part of the human incarnation. And it's easy to turn away from that suffering. There's so many ways to do it, to distract or escape. And uh and certainly all of us do that to some level at some times. It would be impossible to be with the vulnerabilities seriously
Right.
every moment.
Right.
But it's so important to have a practice of being with it sometimes, and inviting it and allowing and it, being curious about it. And it's very hard. It does take our wholeness. I mean, it takes a certain amount of wholeness to be vulnerable.
Mm.
When I see people that aren't vulnerable, sometimes I could get upset, or if there's a hardness, but a lack of vulnerability usually has to do with trauma. Like there's a
Yes.
fear, like it was dangerous. So whether I can feel that guardedness in myself or whether I'm experiencing it in someone else, I can have compassion and know also that the path is the path to healing, the path to reconnection is usually through vulnerability.
I
and
love
that there
that.
are particular pearls. I mean, Bill talks about the core wound and the gifts.
Yes.
I've changed that to the core wounds and the core gifts because I actually
Yeah. I
feel
love
like
that.
there's more than one.
Yes.
And I also feel that it's not just for people. Vulnerability, the way I approach it, isn't just for people who are deep into their soul journey or looking to go down to the deepest wound ever. You know, we have to start playing wherever we are. And
Mm,
so we can't judge our vulnerability of, is it deep enough? Is it core
right.
enough? We just have to be with the vulnerability that is here, that we have the courage to be with. And that's the path that builds the muscle to ever keep going deeper into layers of vulnerability. And from what I've found is that it's never done. I've never reached a place where it feels like, I've said I was done many, many times. I'd hoped I was done,
Sure.
but then I found that I wasn't. And
Yeah.
there's more. And this, it's like an ever unfolding path of deeper layers of vulnerability. And it's not really about the suffering going away. It's more about my capacity to be with that vulnerability, and hold myself with love and have compassion for myself. And that when I do so, I also have greater compassion for others.
Beautiful. Beautiful. No, it reminds me so much of you know, both in the shamanic breathwork work that I do, and I had Linda Starwolf on, and then also with Malidoma, the two things, because I've been there too. You know, I'm done or hoped I was done, and it's like they both said to me, that was your first mistake. You know, it's kind of like this. It's a very shamanic death rebirth. It's like that never ending journey of deeper layers and levels. And I remember Malidoma would say, you know, each initiation qualifies you for more trouble. It's kind of like, you know, and it's like, that has really helped me when it's like, you know, that actually at some level, oftentimes when we do reach a certain level of depth and healing, we're given a deeper challenge, you know, because we now can handle it or go that much deeper or healed well enough to move to that next deeper level. But it takes, and this is another thing I was curious about. um, you know, I love the word heart warrior, and you know, I know Bill's use of the word heart warrior. I use it a little bit different, but I love that you use the phrase love warrior. And I was just curious, comparing and contrasting love warrior and heart warrior, and how you see it. And for some may not know Bill's particularly use of heart warriorship, but I really enjoyed it. It was very powerful to hear you mention and talk about being a love warrior. And yeah, anything you'd like to say about love warrior versus heart warrior and your understanding?
Yeah, like it's hard to say if there's a what the to describe the difference, but I love probably both terms maybe have this in common, and that is just bringing together our love and our heart and our ferocity,
Yes.
because in this world sometimes they're really put as separate things. Like you
Yes.
can either be loving or you can be like really fierce.
Yes.
And in my work with people, I have to say, like, what's really been called for most often is for them to be together. If one
Yes.
is by itself, it's just not enough.
Yes.
Just love and no ferocity is missing something vital. Just ferocity and no love, like, isn't going to carry you very far. And so there's this magical alchemy that happens when both are together. In so sometimes we have to wait uh, for conversations, for engagements until we feel both present. um, it's really needed, or
Yes.
we do the best we can by bringing them both together as best we can, because the moment's calling us to step in with whatever we have, and so we do the best we can. um, but I love to bring in the idea of love warrior, because on some level I feel like there's just several different levels to this, but love is like a power of the universe, that it just like, that is a healing force, that is a higher power
Wow.
too. The
Yes.
wild nature is love, but humans, we drop down here into our power chakra, right? I feel
Yes.
it. There's
Sure.
so many power struggles here, and like games and things that go on at this level relationally that are, suck time and emotional energy. And there's something about coming up here to our heart center. There's so much power here that seems so needed for the world. And so I've been really embracing relationships that feel like there's just a lot of space here,
Mhm.
and trying to, kind of dance around the ones that feel like they're coming more from here, because there's not much you can do if we're not up here,
Yes.
relationally.
Yes.
And also, I wanted to bring in a larger call for the world too, that it isn't just about our human relationships. That's why I brought in Love Warrior for the Earth. I think that sometimes in the world there's so much happening. It's so overwhelming,
Yes.
personally, politically, to engage, that we can think of not even, but it can be easy to just be like, well, what can I do to help the earth or to help,
Yes. Absolutely.
the injustices? And so I wanted to bring a warrior energy in. There's also a view of warrior itself that is viewed as, um, well, patriarchal, not good,
Yes.
like warrior as in like going to war, um, for countries, and not in a way that I believe in or support. But I want to bring in the archetypal power of warrior, like as an energy that is needed. Because in many ways, if we look at the world, some challenges are going on because of a lack of courage, because of a conformity, a capitulation. So when I'm writing, I'm often trying to bring us to to a greater possibility of what could exist, in us, where we can these practices can take us, like where are we headed? And so archetypally in wild yoga, I wanted to end with love warrior, because if we
Mm.
can be coming from the place of love warrior, in the world, in our relationships, and with humans, and also in our relationships with the larger world, like just
Mhm.
imagine the kind of world we could live in.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. Yeah, that's where, I had these dreams about this white tiger, living with this white tiger, and sometimes she had a family of white tigers, and I'm sharing a home with them, and they're around, we're hanging out, and for me it was a big shift for me going from this white panther to a white tiger as my main guide. And because a panther kind of doesn't want to be seen, is very stealth and wonderful, and that was very appropriate for me in a period of my life as a deeply painful introvert. But when I asked her name, it was Shanti, the white tiger of peace, and it was like, for me, the tiger, you have to be a tiger to be, to be a warrior of compassion. You have to have that same tough and tender, and the tiger is not, does, it's just walking out in the forest totally open, like, yeah, go ahead, mess with me, I'm ready. And I think that was a huge shift for me, trying to be more extroverted, more in the world with my sensitivity, with my vulnerabilities, with my woo woo, and my twilight ways of being. And I found that same connection, and I love that, that your connection to the bear, and that same kind of depth, that I found so powerful. And I loved, you really made it, a lot of people get confused about what a mythopoetic identity is, but you actually walk the person through, for the people who are, kind of in the know or understand, but you really take people through it's beautiful, because you kind of put the pieces together as you were tracking your own mythopoetic identity. And I really, I love that. It helped me connect and understand you so much better as well. And again, connections between the bear and an underground river, and all those others. um, but I also wanted to ask, how are we doing? We're doing okay on time. Another phrase that, to me, and I think it's important, because the phrase is feral female ferocity. And since you were talking about, the same thing of bringing together tough and tender, bringing together fierceness and compassion, or fierceness, vulnerability, I think this is so, so important today. And what I love that you're re-owning and reimagining feral, because, and the reason it really caught me is because I've worked with some women in the soul work space who used it in kind of a, you know um, pejorative way, only in the sense that when they were, and I know it's not, this is not the way you're using it at all, but I'd love for you to get your take on it, because I see you as kind of a unique person sharing this. What they were referring to is, there's such a tendency out there today in the new age world of like, um embrace your inner goddess, and kind of become this, this goddess, or and there's all this important, incredible power of the archetypal energy of revivifying the feminine. I'm a devotee of the divine feminine, and I'm a critic of the patriarchy. Although I love that whole discussion about your friend, and like, if you say patriarchy to turn people off, and you got to be more subtle and nuanced, blah blah blah. But it reminded me very much of my work with Robert Johnson, who'd always talk about the dangers of becoming possessed by an archetype. And, he would always kind of caution, be content with being conscious of the archetypal energy. If you try to inhabit it or take it, it'll take you over and burn you up. It's that 10,000 volts that may destroy you. But I've heard at times, wow, are you creating goddesses or feral women, was the way it was presented to me. And I know that is not the way you mean it at all, but a person who all of a sudden is not conscious of those archetypal energies, and they're rewilding themselves, but really, because when we talk about the wild, we're not talking about out of control, we're talking about untamed and connected to that wild wisdom. And that's why I love your work and Bill's work. I mean, have such subtle nuance around that we're not talking about, you know, um, giving yourself permission to act out, right? And
Right.
so I would love your take on how feral female ferocity is not that, but how might we understand that in a way that respects the subtlety and nuance of what we're talking about, while also maybe guiding some younger women who maybe get caught up in the image and the appearance, and get taken over by an archetype that could do them or their relationships harm.
Yeah, well, great. Thanks so much for asking that question and all the nuance and detail you brought into
Yeah,
that. It's really
yeah.
great. And that's why I wanted to talk about these things. It's always dangerous to talk about them because people they read a sentence or a paragraph and then
Right.
boom, they're off. You've offended them.
Yes, yes,
Um, but then we miss out on the conversation. And that's
yes.
really, obviously, I can't include all the points, in
Sure,
one chapter about this.
sure.
But I'm including some. And the interesting thing is, the book was published in 2023, and now here we are more than 2 years later in
Yeah,
2025. And so the conversation has continued for me, which is always interesting after you
sure.
write to see, wow, there's even more. And so I'm going to include some of the more because your
Beautiful.
question kind of like asks that.
Yeah.
And what I've realized, like the feral female ferocity, it's to me, it's like a part of wholeness.
Mm,
And that, I sort of included, it wasn't in Bill's model, or I didn't see it quite in the way I wanted.
sure.
And so it's like calling back in this wholeness that like that actually can sometimes get called woundedness. And
Yes.
maybe sometimes it is. I mean, anger can certainly be, there's a kind of ferocity that can come out that is woundedness,
Sure.
but there is also a kind of ferocity that is wholeness. And another word that has come back to me, is it's about protection.
Mm,
And it's interesting because I've wrestled with this a bit because in Bill's model, we call the protective parts the subpersonalities or the
right.
lesser mature parts. But
Yes.
what I've realized is that, and maybe for everyone, but certainly as a woman, there's something I need in my wholeness called protection. And
Mm,
one way that I realized it is that actually it's been missing
mm,
because no one taught me that much about protection and like, well, what does that mean and what do I have to do and how do I feel that inside me, like valuing myself and my physical body and my boundaries enough that when they're being encroached on or they're enriched, I can say no. Or if somebody
beautiful.
just continues, I can sting, like so I can actually like I have my power.
Beautiful.
And so feral female ferocity is kind of about that. And part of it is naming that in it is that the way that there can be even emotionally abusive games in our culture, which if a woman does that, she can be, continually run over or targeted as a problem
Right.
for saying no, for having boundaries, which is
For
another
sure.
way of continuing to infiltrate
Right.
and hurt, harm, and dominate.
Right.
And so instead, and I've worked with many women who carry shame about feeling anger,
Mm.
even in situations that are like, well, of course you're angry. Look at what's happened, because anger is normally this alarm system in our body that's like boundaries, boundaries, boundaries.
Right.
And if you're a person, and I've known people like this that learn boundaries really well early on, like I call these people ninjas. I watch them. I've even seen women like this, and they
Yes.
can just go, no, 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 no. Just all in the right moments, just right at the
Right.
right time.
Right.
And it's perfect because there's like, at least this is my projection, like
Sure.
nothing gets crossed. And then, I would say for myself and other people I've seen, it's been more of a learning experience, which is I realized after the fact that I should have put that boundary up. Oops. Now I'm pissed. Like, okay, well, I shouldn't take that out on the other person. But the reality is, like, this is a learning for me. Like, I'm
Yes.
learning where my boundaries are, and I'm learning how to be more fierce and how to be more fierce in the moment. So I wanted to write that chapter to call back and honor a ferocity that is a
Mm.
protector. And that anger is part of the whistle blowing of like, whoop, boundaries, something's
Yes.
being violated here. Like I need to listen to that and grow this ferocity that can be a protector for me and for the world too.
I
So
love that. No, that's wonderful. And to me, actually, even though I when I was hearing that, and they were talking about something very different, actually, they were kind of talking, and actually they were calling you could cause that, but actually, feral to embrace that. I actually was mentoring a woman yesterday who's going kind of getting out of an abusive relationship, and we talked about her owning her inner bitch. She's so, well, I don't want to be seen as a bitch, or I'm going to keep my side of the street clean. It's like, wait a minute, your ability to own that as a positive capacity is a beautiful thing, because in our culture, a bitch is actually just a woman who knows who she is and has boundaries and can say no. I mean, it's really a holdover from the misogyny that we struggle from in patriarchy. Is that, so owning that capacity, to me, embracing that, which is also embracing the shadow, embracing those parts of us that, especially growing up Catholic, I've had that issue. It's funny because my wife would be what you call the ninja. I mean, the woman, and that was one of the things that drew me to her, is that she's just, she's much she's much more, has a healthier honest masculine than I do, which I'd wanted my daughter to get hers, but unfortunately she got my tendency. But feral, right, it means an animal who was wild, who's now trying to survive in a domestic situation, or was domesticated and then released back into the wild, right? And is trying to survive in the wild without having been kind of raised in the wild. Isn't that right? Is that kind of what feral would be considered? Am I understanding
yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. And feral is like you have these wild energies like emotions,
Right,
like anger and all sorts of things, the instinct to survive. And you're
right.
also in danger. Like part of being
Yes,
in the wild is there is like, you know, harm is around
yes,
you and you
yes.
have to protect yourself.
Yeah,
So there's a way, and I'm kind of moved sometimes by smaller animals. Like I think I used the scorpion and the snake
yes,
that have a sting and a bite. And
right.
sometimes like I use women too, the seemingly physical weaker gender can seem like, oh well, I think there's even been arguments, well, nature made us this way, you're the least physically strong, so power of the
Right.
physically strongest. And it's like, actually no, like you can be really small and have a, protect yourself and have a
Yes.
large sting. And so there's something about getting a sense of our primal energy, our primal wild energy. And it's not, it's like there's not a clear like, oh, it's always this way or it's always that way. And it's very situational, just like it is in the wild. Like it's a gut feeling, there's an instinct, that happens. And it's like, yeah, this is how I need to like set things for, you know, based on my instinct and gut of what's going on. It's very different from that handed down like women are supposed to be this way or even people are supposed to be this way. And so I wanted to reconnect with that because it feels like there is a gut instinct. I mean, even when people who love the forest see it being chopped down, there's a
Mm,
gut instinct,
yes.
fuck no, like this
Yes.
is wrong.
Yes.
And then we sort of kind of, there can be this capitulation to, well, that's the way it is,
Right.
so I have to just deal. And yeah, there's a truth to that. But also, like, what about this gut instinct? And like,
Yeah.
what if we were all linked? So then female ferocity doesn't just come to be about, women protecting themselves. It's more about actually us as a human species also protecting the earth, and that there's an actual, and what values life. And I think I even put in my book, like, feral female ferocity is a kind of ferocity even men, like
Yeah.
biological men or people of any
Absolutely.
gender. It's
Absolutely.
and I'm trying to distinguish, well, what's different about that than than male ferocity. And I guess, I don't know. And there's probably a lot of healthy male ferocities too. But one reason I like to put it is because male ferocity or patriarchal or masculine ferocity is often looked at as the kind of our everyday world that's creating violence and harm. And so
Right.
I was trying to give a name to an energy which all genders could possess, which would just be a healthy version of like what it is to have a healthy ferocity, a healthy
Yeah.
wild ferocity
Yeah.
that protects us and protects what we love in the world.
I love that. I'm so, I mean, I love the phrase feral female ferocity has the iteration and it actually, as you were speaking, I mean, what kind of was hitting for me was, um, because I am not only a devotee of the divine feminine, but I'm a devotee of the divine feline. I mean, the feline, that's I mean, somehow for me, cats, my first spiritual teacher was my Siamese cat as a kid. I had from 5 to 25. I have just always deep connections to cats, both domestic and wild, and particularly large cats. And I've seen a panther in the wild, got between her and her cubs was kind of a powerful moment for me. And I was thinking that there's something about a feline's ferocity that is also different. It's very protective, it's very defensive. It's, and so I'm going to really meditate on that. I love that because I, there's my dissertation, which became my first book. It's pretty academic as academic press, but Horns and Halos Towards the Blessing of Darkness. And it's about love-hate relationships and about what's so hateful about hate, what's so rageful about rage, like, is there a positive side? What does hate and rage do? And it was a phenomenological study. And
Hmm,
one of the aspects,
fascinating.
yeah, it's I have to send you a copy. I really loved it because that partly is, I talk about the difference between the hate of the master for the slave versus the hate of the slave for the master, right? It's like if the hate or rage is in the movement of freedom and higher degrees of freedom for the individual and the community, that actually can be very powerful and important. And for me, part of what I discovered was we become vulnerable to hate or rage when our intimacy has been betrayed. It's actually betrayed. Intimacy is the soil for hate and rage in an effort to rebuild a sense of self in the face of abuse, which is very
Wow.
different than used in the format that we usually see it in, which is just might is right, right, which is just basically playing out the same things. So yeah, it was very much my partly I wrote it as an issue of growing up Catholic, and every time I like say, well, my brothers might beat me up, I tell, I hate your guts, and my mom would, you don't hate him, you never say you hate anyone. And I was like, well, that puts me in a bind because either I'm evil and something wrong, but man, I hate their
Right.
guts, mom. And it was like, it was very difficult. But I draw on, there's scripture, where Jesus says, until you hate your mother and your father, your brother and sister, and yea, even your own life, you cannot be my disciple. There's lots of interesting things about. So that really helps me play with this idea of female ferocity when it's a matter of boundary protection, survival, and fighting on behalf of those things. Because the other thing, that you are an activist too, which I love, and you discuss that, and have some stories about people you've guided, and of yourself, making a stand in this difficult, challenging world we're living in right now. So I can see where that feral female ferocity has come in as one of your gifts, or one of your superpowers, to be able to draw on.
Yeah. It's, it does. It's very interesting what you shared. Like, I hate feeling, speaking of hate, I
Yeah.
hate feeling anger or
Same,
hate.
same.
It's like the feeling that you have is just, it's horrible.
Yeah.
Like, I really, that'd be a feeling I'd want to escape. That'd be a pain
Yes.
I'd want to escape
Same.
from, a feeling I want to change the channel. And what I've learned is that it's one of the mysteries
Yeah.
that's coming up through my body to teach me
Yes.
about boundaries and protection. And so I can't, I just, it's here for me to pay attention to. And
Right.
certainly I don't want to be in that state, like, all the time, or even much of the time. But when it comes up, it's like, okay, get it. We have a lesson to learn. All right, let's
Yes.
do it. What's
Yes.
what's here? What
Yes.
do I have to pay
Yeah.
attention to?
Yeah. Well, it's like Rumi's The Guest House, right? Welcome all these feelings in, a meanness, sadness, depression, that they're there to clear out for something else. And there's some native practices, that being grateful to Creator for whatever arises, actually just naming and saying, thank you for this hate, thank you for this rage, thank you for this defeat, thank you for this, almost owning it to make it conscious, number one. Number two, to allow that energy to move through us as a form of information and understanding about the world. And in particular, anger, hate, and rage is so often exactly what you said. There's usually something to do with boundaries, violating intimacy, some kind of loss of a sense of self that's being threatened. So beautiful. I could talk with you for another couple hours. I know we've gone deep into all of this, but I want to give you a chance, Rebecca, to just share if there's anything you'd like to add to finish with, and also how people can find out more about your rich, soulful, heart-centered work.
Yeah. Let's see. Where to finish? Um, well, one story I was gonna just tell is that I felt called to is, what we get asked to do in this journey is often very different from what our ego is comfortable with.
Yes.
You had mentioned stories in the wilderness, and one of my first stories of questing was when I got the name Braveheart, which I
Mhm.
wrote about in my book.
Yes.
But that is like, there was far more things that came, like, listening to the trees stories, and being wild love prayer, and lots more. But that initial thing to be Braveheart was so hard, was so central, because the journey of ego, like everyday ego, wants like a different life than the one calling, in a certain way.
Yes.
Like like I could say that my personality would have been very happy with a life deep in the forest, without too many people, just a few good friends to come by and enjoy the wild world with, not attuned to like not attuned to the problems of the world, just reveling in the
Oh,
beauty of the wild with a few friends, not a public figure. That would have been the ego's, like, this is the comfort zone, like,
yes.
life. And the journey of Braveheart, that has called into deeper layers, involves, being vulnerable in the world, facing the wounds or the betrayals again and again, and still showing up as who I am, still offering myself, facing the world, like, things that are happening, and being here, and continuing to, like, regularly listen to
Mm.
the dreams and nature for, well, what's next. And it's not done. Like, there's still way more ahead, and every time getting stronger, so that I can do the next courageous thing that gets asked about showing up in this way and that way. And so I just want to put that out there because it's the fine print. Sometimes people sign up for a journey that's
Yes.
about like, oh, I just want the good life, and it is good. Like, because I still give myself times alone in nature to live in those moments. And there also is a joy in living your purpose, like
Yes.
that to know that, oh, this, I'm on track. I'm doing what I can. I'm doing my part. I'm doing what's asked, despite the heartbreak and other things that are difficult. And yeah, so I just wanted to share that, and also I'll just say that um, there's practices in there for everyone, and I love hearing each person's story that I work with and meeting people wherever they're at. I always learn so much from the connection. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some of my story here, and yeah, love to look forward to people getting in touch with me. My website's RebeccaWildbear.com, which has my email and phone number and ways to connect with me, and my Substack newsletter where you can follow my writings. So I'm having a new free 7-day offering that's going to be done in about a month on my website. So feel free to leap in and join me, and love to be in conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I want to thank you so much for your time, for the heart and soul you put into your writing, your work, your guiding, your friendships. And I feel personally so nourished by it. And you're just one of the most authentic people I know. And I really mean that. It's always a joy to be in touch. And, I also just want, for anyone who's taken up this mantle and knowing my own journeys and challenges, and could say so many things similar to, you know, um, as a kid, I wanted to be living off the grid by myself, being a forest ranger during the summer and ski patrol it in the winter, and just kind of anonymous. And it's so strange to me of like, what kind of life am I living now? And there's sometimes that longing for that. And having said that, there is so much truth in how these twists of fate guide us more deeply into our destiny and what we're here to find our gifts and give them away to our people, and how our ego will kind of tempt us into choosing something that undoes us, right? And so the soul gets to have a laugh at the ego at that point. If hopefully we can just laugh or have a good sense of humor. So thank you for showing up in listening and following your soul's calling and path. It has benefited so many and continues to do. And again, if you get a chance out there, reader, listener, check out Wild Yoga. You won't be disappointed. And maybe we'll get a chance to do that river trip or some trip to guide together. That
Oh,
that would be a dream for me.
I would love that,
Yep,
Michael. That would be
same.
really great.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And as always, thank you for tuning into the other side of things. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for tuning in to the other side of things. I've been your host and guide, Dr. Michael DeMaria. You can find out more about my work at michaeldemaria.com. Explore the books, music, and online programs and films. And we'll see you next time on The Other Side.